The executioner's blade gleamed in the harsh sunlight as it rose above Roronoa Zoro's head. 9 days without food had left him a shadow of the fearsome bounty hunter who had terrorized pirates across East Blue. His arms ached against the ropes, binding him to the wooden post in the marine base courtyard, the unforgiving sun beating down on his green hair. This was how the legend of Roronoa Zoro would end, not in glorious battle, but tied to a post like a common criminal. Captain Morgan's metallic jaw reflected the sunlight as he gave the signal. Execute the prisoner. Blood pounded in Zoro's ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, not with his promise to Kuina still unfulfilled. Not before he became the greatest swordsman in the world. The blade began its downward arc. In another world, in another time, a boy in a straw hat would have crashed into this courtyard, disrupting this execution with his rubber fists and unbreakable will. That boy would have freed the demon swordsman and changed both their destinies forever. But in this world, in this moment, no rubber boy appeared. No straw hat blocked the sun. No boisterous laugh cut through the tension. The blade continued its descent. With one last surge of desperate strength, Zoro twisted his body. The executioner's blade missed his neck by millimeters, slicing instead through the ropes binding his right arm. In the confusion that followed, Zoro lunged forward, his free hand grasping the executioner's ankle, pulling the man off balance. As the marine toppled, Zoro caught the falling sword with his newly freed hand. Fire! Captain Morgan bellowed, his axe hand glinting menacingly. Kill him! Bullets whizzed through the air as Zoro cut himself free, diving behind the execution. Post for cover. Blood trickled from a grazing wound on his shoulder, but adrenaline dulled the pain. His mind raced. No weapons, no allies, surrounded by marines. The odds were impossible, yet impossible odds had never stopped Roronoa Zoro before. Through the haze of hunger and pain, memories of his childhood dojo flashed before his eyes. The countless defeats at Kuina's hands, the tearful promise made over, her white sword after her death. The vow to become so strong that his name would reach the heavens. That promise couldn't end here. With a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the marine base, Zoro burst from behind the post, the executioner's blade becoming an extension of his arm as he cut through the first line of marines. Their shocked faces registered too late that the prisoner they had starved for 9 days still possessed the strength of a demon. What are you waiting for? Captain Morgan's voice thundered across the courtyard. He's just one man. Kill him! But Zoro was no ordinary man. Even weakened by hunger and captivity, his swordsmanship was beyond anything these rank-and-file marines had ever encountered. The blade danced in his hand, creating a whirlwind of steel that bought him precious seconds he needed to escape. He needed his swords. Through the chaos, Zoro spotted Morgan's son, Helmeppo, cowering by the entrance to the main building. The same coward who had made and broken his promise, leading to Zoro's capture in the first place. The same coward who had confiscated his 3 swords, including Wado Ichimonji, the white blade that embodied his promise to Kuina. With grim determination, Zoro cut a path toward Helmeppo, leaving stunned and wounded marines in his wake. The spoiled son's eyes widened in terror as the escaped prisoner approached. Where are my swords? Zoro's voice was a low growl, the executioner's blade pressing against Helmeppo's throat. My room? Helmeppo squeaked, his voice breaking with fear. Second floor, end of the hall. Using Helmeppo as a shield, Zoro navigated through the building, every step an effort as his starved body threatened to betray him. When they reached the room, he saw them immediately. 3 swords leaning against the wall, 1 white sheath standing out among them. Wado Ichimonji, Kina's sword, reunited with his blades. Something changed in Zoro's demeanor. The desperate fugitive became the demon of East Blue once more. With his precious white sword between his teeth and the other 2 in his hands, he prepared to cut his way to freedom. All units converge on the main building. Captain Morgan's voice echoed through the base. Do not let the prisoner escape. The building was being surrounded. Time was running out. Zoro burst through the window, shards of glass raining down as he landed in the courtyard amidst a squadron of startled marines. His 3-sword style, a technique of his own creation, transformed him into a whirlwind of blades. No longer fighting just to escape, but to honor his pledge, to keep his promise. Alive. Onigiri! With this attack, a triangle of slashes cleared a path through the Marines. Blood splattered the courtyard stones as Zoro charged toward the outer gate. Freedom was just beyond those walls, but between him and that freedom stood Captain Morgan himself, axe hand raised. "You'll die here, Roronoa," Morgan declared, his face twisted with rage. "Not today," Zoro replied, Wado Ichimonji clenched firmly between his teeth. "I have a promise to keep." Their weapons clashed with enough force to send shockwaves across the courtyard. Despite his weakened state, Zoro matched the Marine captain's strength. What he lacked in physical power, he made up for in skill and desperation. This wasn't just a fight for freedom, it was a fight for his dream. In a flurry of strikes too fast for the eye to follow, Zoro found an opening. His blades connected, slicing through Morgan's axe hand and sending the Marine captain crashing to the ground. The base fell silent, Marines frozen in disbelief at the sight of their fallen leader. Seizing the moment, Zoro staggered toward the gate. No one dared to stop him. The legend of Roronoa Zoro, the demon who escaped Marine execution, was born that day. But as he disappeared into the town beyond the base, an unsettling question followed him. What next? His reputation as a bounty hunter was finished. The Marines would hunt him relentlessly now, and his dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman seemed further away than ever. Little did he know that somewhere on the seas of East Blue, a boy in a straw hat was beginning his own journey, a journey that would never intersect with Zoro's in this timeline. Little did he know how this single divergence would change not just his fate, but the fate of the entire world. As Zoro commandeered a small fishing boat at the harbor, his mind was already turning to his next challenge, surviving long enough to pursue Hawkeye's Mihawk, the current greatest swordsman in the world. But something caught his eye as the boat drifted away from the dock, a wanted poster fluttering in the wind. The face on it was young, bearing a wide grin beneath a straw hat. "Monkey D. Luffy," Zoro read, his brow furrowing. Never heard of him. The poster disappeared from view as Zoro's boat cleared the harbor, carrying him toward a destiny very different from the one he might have known, a destiny without the Straw Hat Pirates, without Nakama, without the man who would have been his captain. This was just the beginning of the lone journey of Roronoa Zoro, and somewhere in the vastness of the Grand Line, Hawkeye's Mihawk felt a strange shiver, as if the strings of fate had suddenly changed. Their course, the small fishing boat rocked violently as waves crashed against its hull. 3 days had passed since Zoro's escape from the Marine base, and the elements showed him no mercy. His wounds had barely begun to heal, and hunger still gnawed at his insides. The meager provisions he had stolen were nearly gone. Zoro gripped the rudder tightly, his knuckles white with effort. The vast blue expanse of the East Blue stretched endlessly around him, with no land in sight. Navigation had never been his strength. He was a swordsman, not a sailor, and now that weakness threatened his survival. A storm was brewing on the horizon, dark clouds gathering ominously. Zoro narrowed his eyes against the salt spray. He needed to find land before the storm hit, or his journey would end here, claimed by the sea rather than a worthy opponent. As if answering his unspoken prayer, a faint outline appeared in the distance. An island. With renewed determination, Zoro adjusted his course, ignoring the burning in his muscles as he rowed toward salvation. The fishing village on the eastern shore of the island was small and unremarkable. Zoro beached his boat in a secluded cove, away from curious eyes. His reputation would have preceded him, and the last thing he needed was a well-meaning villager reporting his presence to the Marines. Under the cover of dusk, he made his way to the outskirts of the village. A small, abandoned shed would serve as shelter for the night. As he settled down, back against the wall and swords within reach, exhaustion finally claimed him. His sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of Quina and their childhood duels. In these dreams, she always asked the same question. "Are you still on the path, Zoro?" Morning brought the sounds of the village coming to life. Cautiously, Zoro peered through a crack in the shed wall. People went about their business, unaware of the fugitive in their midst. His stomach rumbled painfully, reminding him of his predicament. He needed food, information, and possibly a better boat. A risk assessment was necessary. One hand on Wado Ichimonji, Zoro considered his options. His distinctive green hair would give him away instantly. With grim resolve, he tore a strip from his shirt and fashioned it into a makeshift bandana, covering His telltale locks. The village market was bustling when Zoro slipped in, keeping his head down and his senses alert. He filched an apple from a distracted vendor, then another. Not his proudest moment, but survival took precedence over honor. For now, as he moved through the crowd, snippets of conversation reached his ears. Marines were searching for him. His bounty had increased. Captain Morgan had been demoted for allowing his escape. That last bit brought a grim smile to Zoro's face. At least his humiliation of the axe-handed captain had consequences. Near the docks, a group of fishermen huddled around a newly posted bulletin. Curious, Zoro edged closer, only to freeze at what he saw. His own face glared back at him from a wanted poster. Wanted, dead or alive. Roronoa Zoro, 5,000 berries. The bounty was modest by Grand Line standards, but significant for East Blue. More concerning was the shift in his status. No longer the hunter, but the hunted. They say he killed 20 Marines with one swing of his sword. One fisherman whispered. I heard he can cut steel with his bare hands, another added. Zoro almost scoffed at the exaggerations, but caught himself. Let them fear him. Fear might keep them from looking too closely at the bandana, wearing stranger in their midst. As he retreated from the docks, a commotion near the village entrance caught his attention. Marines. A small squad, but enough to be problematic in his weakened state. They were questioning villagers, showing what Zoro assumed was his wanted poster. Time to move. But as he turned to leave, he collided with a young woman carrying a basket of fish. The basket tumbled, its contents spilling across the dirt. I am so sorry, she exclaimed, dropping to her knees to gather her wares. Zoro hesitated. The smart move would be to walk away, to put distance between himself and the Marines. Instead, he knelt and helped her collect the scattered fish. Thank you, she said, looking up at him. Her eyes widened slightly as they met his, and for a heart-stopping moment, Zoro thought she recognized him. Instead, she smiled. You look hungry. Would you like some food? Before he could answer, a shout went up from the Marine squad. They had spotted him. His bandana had slipped, revealing a glimpse of green hair. There he is, Roronoa Zoro. The woman gasped, her basket dropping once more. You are... Zoro was already moving, hands going to his swords. But to his surprise, the woman grabbed his arm. This way, she said urgently, pulling him toward a narrow alley between buildings. They ran through the village's back paths, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. The woman led him to a small house on the outskirts, ushering him inside and closing the door firmly behind them. Why are you helping me? Zoro demanded, hands still on his swords. My brother was to be executed by Captain Morgan for accidentally fishing in waters reserved for the Marines, she explained, moving to peek through the curtains. The day before his execution, all charges were mysteriously dropped, the same day you escaped. Understanding dawned on Zoro. In his fight through the Marine base, he had released other prisoners, not out of compassion, but as a diversion. One of those must have been this woman's brother. Karma, he muttered. They are searching the eastern shore, she informed him, turning from the window. There is a boat you can take from the western cove after nightfall. I will bring you food until then. True to her word, the woman provided Zoro with his first proper meal in days. As strength returned to his limbs, so did his resolve. This brief respite was a gift, but the path ahead remained treacherous. Nightfall brought a cloak of darkness under which Zoro made his escape. The boat the woman provided was small but seaworthy, certainly better than his stolen fishing vessel. Where will you go? She asked as he prepared to depart. Zoro looked to the horizon, to the endless possibility of the sea. Wherever I need to become the greatest swordsman in the world. With that declaration hanging in the night air, Zoro set sail once more. His next destination was already forming in his mind, Logetown, the city of the beginning and the end, the place where Gold Roger had been executed, and where rumors suggested strong swordsmen could be found, and perhaps there he might find the first clues to the whereabouts of Hawkeye's Mihawk, the man he must ultimately defeat to fulfill his promise to Kuina. What Zoro could not know was that his solitary journey was altering the very fabric of fate. For in a different world, a straw-hatted boy named Luffy was about to arrive at the very Marine base Zoro had fled, seeking a swordsman for his crew. A meeting that would never happen, a partnership that would never form, and consequences that would ripple across the entire world. Loguetown bustled with activity as merchants hawked their wares and pirates schemed in shadowy taverns. The execution platform where Gold Roger met his end loomed over the city, a silent reminder of the fate that awaited most who dared challenge the world government. Zoro moved through the crowds with newfound caution. 2 months had transformed him. His hair was longer now, tied back and hidden beneath a hood. A scar was forming across his chest from a close encounter with a marine patrol boat. But the most significant change was in his eyes. Harder now, constantly scanning for threats. His wanted poster had evolved too. Wanted, dead or alive. Roronoa Zoro, 12,000 berries. The price on his head had more than doubled after he'd taken down a marine lieutenant who had recognized him in a port town. Zoro hadn't sought the fight, but neither had he run from it. That wasn't his way. The Rusty Anchor Tavern was exactly the kind of establishment Zoro needed, filled with the dregs of seafaring society, where information flowed as freely as cheap rum. He claimed a corner table, back to the wall, and ordered, "The house special. You hear about that straw hat kid?" A grizzled sailor asked his companion at the next table. The one who took down Buggy the Clown? Hard to believe a rookie could manage that. Zoro's ears perked up. He'd encountered Buggy's crew once during his bounty hunting days. The clown captain was no pushover, especially in East Blue. They say he's got a small crew. Just him, a girl, and a long-nosed liar. But they're making waves. Interesting, but irrelevant to Zoro's quest. He turned his attention back to his meal until another name caught his attention. Heard Hawkeye's was spotted in East Blue recently. Sliced a Don Krieg's entire fleet to ribbons for disturbing his nap. Zoro nearly choked on his food. Hawkeye's Mihawk here in East Blue? This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. "Where?" he interrupted, turning to the sailors who eyed him suspiciously. "Who's asking?" In a fluid motion, Zoro shifted his cloak, revealing the white hilt of Wado Ichimonji. The sailors' eyes widened in recognition. "Near the Barati, that floating restaurant," one finally answered, voice lowered. "But that was weeks ago. He's probably back in the Grand Line by now." Disappointment settled in Zoro's gut. So close, yet still beyond reach. But now he had a direction. The Grand Line, the most dangerous sea in the world, where the strongest swordsmen gathered. As he left the tavern, a commotion in the street drew his attention. A group of Marines surrounded a young woman with short orange hair who clutched a bag protectively. "Return the stolen map, thief," a Marine officer demanded. The woman's defiant stance stirred something in Zoro. She was outnumbered but showed no fear. It reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. "I stole nothing," she replied coolly. "This map was given to me." "Liar!" The officer's hand moved to his sword. "That map belongs to the Marines." Against his better judgment, Zoro found himself moving forward. Getting involved with a thief was foolish, especially with his bounty. But something about the scene bothered him. "Is it worth drawing your sword against an unarmed woman?" he called out, hand resting casually on Wado Ichimonji. All eyes turned to him. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "This doesn't concern you, citizen," the officer replied, though his eyes narrowed as he took in Zoro's 3 swords. "Maybe not," Zoro acknowledged, "but I'm making it my concern." Recognition dawned on the officer's face. "You're Roronoa Zoro." The Marines reached for their weapons, but Zoro was already moving. With practiced precision, he drew 2 swords and disarmed the closest Marines without drawing blood. He didn't want unnecessary deaths on his conscience. "Run," he told the woman who didn't need to be told twice. She disappeared into an alley as Zoro faced the remaining Marines. The officer drew his sword. "Surrender, Roronoa. There's nowhere to run." Zoro's response was a grim smile as he placed Wado Ichimonji between his teeth and drew his 3rd sword. "Who's running?" What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. Zoro moved like water through the Marine ranks, his 3-sword style, leaving a path of unconscious bodies and broken weapons. Not a single Marine fell dead, though many would wake with injuries to remind them of their encounter with East Blue's demon. When it was over, only the officer remained standing, sword shaking in his hand. "Monster!" he whispered. Zoro sheathed his swords. Remember this mercy the next time we meet. As alarm bells began to sound throughout Logetown, Zoro made his escape through the maze of streets. He needed to leave immediately, as the entire Marine contingent would be after him now. To his surprise, he found the orange-haired woman waiting for him at the docks, leaning against a small but well-maintained boat. Need a ride? She asked casually, as if they were old friends. I owe you one. Zoro eyed her suspiciously. Who are you? Nami, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm a navigator. And a thief, Zoro added. She shrugged, unapologetic. We all have our talents. Mine just happens to be liberating treasure from those who don't deserve it. The sound of Marines approaching made the decision for him. Zoro jumped into Nami's boat as she untied the mooring rope. Where are you headed? She asked as they sailed away from Logetown, Marine ships scrambling to pursue. The Grand Line. Zoro answered, watching Logetown shrink behind them. Nami's eyebrows rose. Alone? That's suicide. I'm not looking for safety, Zoro replied. I'm looking for the greatest swordsman in the world. Understanding dawned on Nami's face. Hawk eyes Mihawk. They sailed in silence for a while, Nami expertly navigating around. A patrol ship. Finally, she spoke again. I can get you to the entrance of the Grand Line, she offered. I'm headed that way myself. After that, you're on your own. Zoro nodded. An alliance of convenience. He could accept that. What neither of them knew was that in another timeline, they would have been crewmates under a captain with an unwavering dream and an infectious laugh. Instead, they were two solitary souls, using each other temporarily to advance their own goals. As night fell, Zoro looked up at the stars, his hand resting on Kina's sword. I'm coming for you, Mihawk, he whispered to the vastness of the ocean. And I will defeat you. In that moment, somewhere on the Grand Line, Hawkeye's Mihawk paused in the middle of enjoying his wine, a strange premonition passing over him. The feeling that a unique challenge was approaching, one that might someday truly test his title as the world's greatest swordsman. The Bharati floated serenely on the calm waters of East Blue, its fish-shaped structure standing out against the horizon. From their small boat, Zoro observed the famous floating restaurant with narrowed eyes. This is where Hawkeye's was last seen? He asked Nami, who was securing their vessel to the Bharati's docking area. According to the rumors, she confirmed, though I doubt he stuck around after destroying Don Krieg's fleet. Their partnership had lasted longer than either had anticipated. Nami's navigation skills had proven invaluable, and Zoro's strength had deterred multiple pirate crews who might otherwise have targeted a lone woman at sea. It wasn't friendship. Both remained too guarded for that, but it was an effective alliance. I just need information, Zoro said, stepping onto the dock. Someone here might know where he went. Nami followed, adjusting the bag containing her maps and stolen treasures. While you do that, I'm going to enjoy a proper meal for once. Your cooking is terrible. Zoro grunted but didn't disagree. Culinary skills had never been a priority in his training regimen. The interior of the Bharati was bustling with activity. Chefs in white uniforms darted between tables, serving elaborately. Prepared dishes to patrons from all walks of life. Zoro scanned the room, looking for anyone who might have useful information. His attention was drawn to a commotion at a table near the center of the restaurant. A young man with a straw hat was arguing loudly with a blonde chef in a black suit. What? Do you mean I have to work here for a year? The straw-hatted boy exclaimed. I just broke one wall. One wall? The blonde chef retorted. You crashed through the roof and destroyed our head chef's bedroom, you rubber idiot. Zoro watched the exchange with mild interest. The boy seemed oddly familiar, though Zoro was certain they had never met. Perhaps he had seen him on a wanted poster. That must be the Straw Hat Kid the sailors mentioned, Nami whispered, suddenly beside him. Monkey D. Luffy. They say he ate a devil fruit that made his body rubber. So that was it. Zoro had heard stories of devil fruit users, but had never encountered one personally. It would explain how the boy had apparently crashed through the Bharati's roof and survived. As if sensing their attention, the straw-hatted boy, Luffy, turned and looked directly at them. For a brief moment, his eyes met Zoro's, and something inexplicable passed between them. A sense of potential, of possibility. Of a connection that in another life might have meant something significant. Then the moment passed, and Luffy returned to his argument with the blonde chef. Let's get a table, Zoro said, shaking off the strange feeling. I need to ask about Mihawk. They were halfway to an empty table when the restaurant doors burst open. A tall, gaunt man entered, flanked by pirates bearing the emblem of Don Krieg's fleet. Food, the man commanded weakly. Please, food for my captain. He collapsed to his knees, clearly starving. The restaurant patrons whispered among themselves, recognizing the infamous Don Krieg's flag. The blonde chef who had been arguing with Luffy disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a plate of food which he placed before the starving pirate. Sanji, an older chef with an impressive braided mustache and wooden legs, shouted, "What are you doing feeding a pirate?" "A hungry man is a hungry man," the blonde chef, Sanji, replied. Firmly, Zoro watched the scene unfold with growing unease. His instincts told him something significant was about to happen. The starving pirate devoured the food, and after thanking Sanji, revealed his true purpose. Don Krieg's fleet had been decimated by a single man with hawk-like eyes, and they needed the Baratie to rebuild their forces. Hawkeye's Mihawk. The name sent a jolt through Zoro's body. He had just missed him. Chaos erupted as Don Krieg himself appeared, fully recovered thanks to the food and immediately threatening to take over the Baratie. The chefs prepared for battle while patrons fled in panic. "We should leave," Nami urged, tugging at Zoro's arm. "This isn't our fight." Zoro remained rooted to the spot. Mihawk destroyed Krieg's fleet. He might still be nearby. Before Nami could argue further, a cry went up from outside. The patrons who had fled were rushing back in, faces pale with terror. "He's here! The man with the hawk eyes is here!" Zoro's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been training for since childhood. His hand instinctively went to Wado Ichimonji, feeling the familiar weight of Kuina's sword. Outside, the sea had parted around a small boat shaped like a coffin, adorned with candles that burned with an eerie green flame. In it sat a man with piercing hawk-like eyes, wearing a wide-brimmed black hat adorned with a plume and a cross-shaped sword on his back. Draculae Mihawk, the greatest swordsman in the world. Zoro stepped forward, aware that every eye had turned to him. Even the straw-hatted boy Luffy watched with curious intensity. "Hawkeye's Mihawk," Zoro called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I have searched for you." Mihawk regarded him with cold indifference. "And who might you be?" "Roronoa Zoro," he answered, drawing his 3 swords. "The man who will surpass you." A flicker of interest crossed Mihawk's face. Bold words from one so young. In the background, Zoro vaguely registered Don Krieg and his men retreating, the blonde chef Sanji arguing with the head chef, and Luffy watching the scene with unusual seriousness. But all of that faded into irrelevance as Zoro focused solely on Mihawk. "I challenge you," Zoro declared, placing Wado Ichimonji in his mouth and assuming his 3-sword stance. Mihawk stepped off his boat onto the deck of the Baratie. Well, let us see what East Blue's demon is capable of. With deliberate slowness, Mihawk reached behind his neck, not for his massive sword, but for a small knife barely longer than his finger. "What are you doing?" Zoro demanded, insulted. "I am not so cruel as to hunt rabbits with cannons," Mihawk replied calmly. "This is the smallest blade I carry, yet it will be more than adequate." Rage and humiliation surged through Zoro, but he suppressed them. Losing control would only prove Mihawk right. Instead, he charged forward, blades whirling in his signature onigiri attack. Mihawk didn't even shift his stance. With minimal movement, he deflected all 3 of Zoro's swords with his tiny knife, the force of the parry sending Zoro stumbling. "Backward! Impossible!" Zoro gasped, feeling true fear for the first time since his childhood duels with Kuina. Somewhere behind him, he heard Nami's sharp intake of breath, and oddly, a shout of encouragement from the straw-hatted boy, but none of that mattered now. All that existed was this moment, this duel, this seemingly insurmountable gap between himself and his goal. "Is this the extent of your resolve?" Mihawk asked, his piercing eyes studying Zoro with renewed interest. Zoro steadied himself, tightening his grip on his swords. "No," he answered, his voice iron with determination. "I am just getting started." And as he prepared for his next attack, Zoro knew with absolute certainty that this encounter would change the course of his life forever. Blood spread across the deck of the Baratie as Zoro fell to his knees, his chest sliced open by Hawkeye's Mihawk's black blade. Their duel had been brief but devastating, exposing the vast gulf between Zoro's skills and the world's greatest swordsman. "Why don't you step back?" Mihawk had asked, when Zoro refused to retreat despite clearly being outmatched. "I would rather die than admit defeat," Zoro Zoro had replied, charging forward one final time. It was then that Mihawk had drawn his true weapon, the massive black blade Yoru, and delivered the decisive strike that now left Zoro on the verge of death. Consciousness faded, Zoro raised his sword, Wado Ichimonji, toward Mihawk in a final gesture of defiance. "What is your name, young swordsman?" Mihawk asked, genuine respect now evident in his voice. "Roronoa Zoro," he managed to answer through the pain. "I shall remember it," Mihawk declared. "It has been long since I met one with such spirit. You have sought me out to challenge me, not out of foolishness, but to test yourself. For that courage alone, I shall let you live to grow stronger." Mihawk sheathed his sword and turned to leave. "Seek me out in the Grand Line when you have mastered your craft. I will be waiting." With those words echoing in his ears, Zoro collapsed fully onto the deck, his blood pooling beneath him. Chaos erupted around him. Don Krieg, seeing Mihawk preparing to depart, launched an attack on the swordsman that was casually deflected. The blonde chef Sanji was shouting orders to get medical assistance. And strangely, the boy with the straw hat, Luffy, was looking at Zoro with an expression of admiration and something like regret. As darkness claimed him, Zoro thought he heard Nami's voice calling his name, but then there was only silence. Awoke days later in a small room above the Bharati. His chest was heavily bandaged, and the slightest movement sent waves of agony through his body, but he was alive. Finally awake, a gruff voice observed. Zoro turned his head to see the head chef of the Bharati, the man with the impressive mustache and wooden leg, sitting in a chair beside his bed. "You're lucky to be alive," the chef continued. "Hawkeye's doesn't usually leave challengers breathing." "Who treated my wounds?" Zoro asked, his voice hoarse. "I did," the chef answered. "Name's Zeph. I've patched up enough injuries in my time, though yours were among the worst I've seen." Zoro attempted to sit up but fell back with a grimace of pain. "Don't be stupid," Zeph admonished. "That wound will take weeks to heal properly. You won't be challenging anyone for a while." Weeks! Zoro closed his eyes in frustration. He didn't have weeks to spare. Mihawk was out there, and the gap between them wasn't going to close itself. "The orange-haired girl you were with left," Zeph informed him casually. "Said something about business in Kokoyashi Village. Left this for you." He handed Zoro a folded piece of paper. Inside was a crude map and a brief note. "Unfinished business. Maybe our paths will cross again. Nami." Zoro wasn't surprised. Their alliance had always been temporary. Still, a strange sense of loss settled over him. In another life, another world, perhaps their connection might have been different. "What about the others?" Zoro asked. "Krieg and his men." "Driven off," Zeph replied. "After my hawk left, they tried to take over the Bharati again, but that rubber boy and my chefs fought them off." "The Straw Hat Kid?" Zeph nodded. "Monkey D. Luffy. Strange one, that boy. He was working here briefly to pay for damages, but he left after the battle. Said he had to find his navigator, who'd stolen his ship, so Nami had played her thieving games with Luffy too." Zoro wasn't surprised, but he found himself hoping the Straw Hat Boy didn't catch up with her. There was something dangerous about Nami's unfinished business that Zoro had sensed but never pressed her about. Days passed slowly in the Bharati. Against Zeph's orders, Zoro began training as soon as he could stand, reopening his wound multiple times before finally accepting that proper healing was necessary. During his recovery, he formed an unlikely friendship with Sanji, the blonde chef, who had initially resented having to help care for the injured swordsman. "Why do you want to be the greatest?" Sanji asked one evening as they shared a bottle of sake on the deck. "What does it matter in the end?" Zoro took a long drink before answering. "I made a promise to someone who can't fulfill their own dream. Her spirit lives in my ambition." Sanji seemed to understand. "I have a dream too," he admitted. "To find the All Blue, a legendary sea where fish from all the oceans gather." "Why don't you go look for it?" Zoro asked. Sanji's gaze drifted toward Zeph, who was berating a chef inside. "I have a debt to pay first." As weeks turned into a month, Zoro's strength gradually returned. Though the massive scar across his chest would never fade, he wore it as a reminder of how far he still had to go. "I need to get to the Grand Line," he told Zeph and Sanji as he prepared to depart. "Mihawk is waiting." "You'll need a better boat," Zeph pointed out, "and a log pose. The Grand Line isn't like East Blue." "A log what?" "A special compass," Sanji. Explained, normal compasses don't work on the Grand Line. The islands each have their own magnetic field. This was new information to Zoro. Despite his determination, he realized how unprepared he truly was. I can take you as far as Logtown, Sanji offered unexpectedly. I need to pick up supplies anyway. You can get what you need there. Zoro eyed the chef suspiciously. Why would you help me? Sanji lit a cigarette, blowing smoke into the evening air. Let's just say I respect anyone stupid enough to chase their dream, no matter the cost. The journey to Logtown was uneventful, and upon arrival, Zoro and Sanji parted ways with a simple handshake. Don't die before you achieve your dream, Sanji said. It would be a waste of good sake. Zoro smirked. Same to you, Cook. Find your all blue. As Sanji's boat disappeared back toward the Bharati, Zoro turned toward Logtown, the city of the beginning and the end. Here, Gold Roger had been born and executed. And here, Roronoa Zoro would prepare for his journey into the Grand Line, the sea where dreams were either realized or broken. What he didn't know was that elsewhere in Logtown, a straw-hatted boy and his small crew were also preparing to enter. The Grand Line, their paths almost intersecting with his once again before diverging towards separate destinies. Reverse Mountain loomed before Zoro's small vessel, its peak hidden among the clouds. The waters around him churned violently, pushing against the bow as if trying to force him back to East Blue, back to safety. But safety had never been Zoro's goal, so this is the entrance to the Grand Line, he muttered, gripping the tiller tightly. In Logtown, he had managed to acquire the necessities Sanji had mentioned, a log pose, sturdier clothes, and supplies that would last him through the initial journey. He had also narrowly avoided a marine captain named Smoker, whose reputation for catching pirates had spread throughout East Blue. What Zoro hadn't expected was the sheer force of the current leading. Up to Reverse Mountain, his small boat creaked ominously as it was pulled toward the mountain slope, water rushing upward against all natural law. This is insanity, Zoro growled, fighting to keep his vessel on course. One wrong move would dash him against the rocks. His boat hit the upward slope. The force slammed Zoro backward. Water sprayed over him as the vessel shot upward at impossible speed. Racing along the narrow channel carved into the mountain, the boat crested the peak, momentarily becoming airborne, giving Zoro a breathtaking view of the legendary Grand Line. Stretching out below him, it was just a glimpse, a brief moment of awe before gravity reclaimed his vessel and sent it hurtling down the mountain's reverse slope. The descent was even more treacherous than the climb. The boat gained speed, threatening to splinter apart from the force. Zoro held on grimly, his knuckles white on the tiller, making minute adjustments to avoid the channel walls. As the end of the channel approached, something massive rose from the waters below, a black shape larger than any Sea King Zoro had encountered, in East Blue. What in the world? Zoro breathed as the silhouette took form. A whale. A mountain-sized whale with terrible scars across its head, blocking the entire exit of the channel. There was no time to change course. Zoro's boat shot out of the channel and smashed directly into the whale's side, splintering into pieces upon impact. The swordsman was thrown clear, tumbling through the air before crashing into the cold waters of the Grand Line. Strong swimmer though he was, the impact dazed him. As darkness threatened to claim his consciousness, Zoro felt something grasp his wrist, pulling him upward toward the light. He awoke on a small wooden platform floating on the waves. Beside him sat an elderly man with a flower-like growth on his head, reading a newspaper as casually as if he were in his own living room rather than in the middle of the ocean. Finally awake, the old man noted without looking up. Thought you might have died. Zoro sat up cautiously, checking that his 3 swords were still secured at his waist. They were. Who are you, Crocus? The man replied. Caretaker of Laboon. Laboon? Crocus gestured toward the massive whale, which now floated peacefully nearby. This fellow, been waiting here for certain pirates for over 50 years. Zoro listened as Crocus explained the whale's sad history, a crew of pirates who had promised to return but never did, and how Laboon had taken to ramming his head against the Red Line in despair. Foolish to wait so long for someone who's probably dead, Zoro commented, though something about the whale's dedication to a promise struck a chord within him. Perhaps, Crocus agreed, but some promises are worth keeping, even if they seem impossible. The words hit close to home. Wasn't that exactly what Zoro was doing? Chasing an impossible promise made to a dead friend. Your boat is destroyed. Crocus observed. I can take you to the nearest island on my vessel. It's the least I can do after Laboon wrecked your ship, albeit unintentionally. Zoro accepted the offer with a nod. He had no alternative. The nearest island, as it turned out, was Whiskey Peak, a place Crocus warned was not as welcoming as it appeared. The Grand Line is nothing like the blues you're familiar with, the old man cautioned as they approached the island. Each island has its own climate, its own magnetic field. The log pose needs time to adapt to each island before pointing to the next, and the people dangers often outweigh the natural ones. Zoro took the warning seriously, his hand instinctively checking his swords as they docked. Whiskey Peak appeared to be a cheerful town, its citizens rushing to greet the new arrival with open arms and celebrations. Too cheerful, too welcoming, for a place supposedly dangerous. Welcome, traveler. A man with curly hair exclaimed. We don't get many solo sailors on the Grand Line. Please join our feast tonight. Zoro's suspicions were confirmed when, after pretending to drink himself into a stupor during the welcoming party, he overheard his host's true intentions. Another bounty for Baroque works. A woman's voice said from the shadows, the swordsman is worth 17 million berries now. Mr. 8 Miss Wednesday, shall we collect while he sleeps? Another voice asked. Zoro's eyes opened in the darkness. Baroque works. The criminal organization Crocus had mentioned. Bounty hunters disguised as welcoming townsfolk. And they had just made a grave miscalculation when they came for him, thinking him drunk and vulnerable. They found instead a demon waiting in the shadows. The three-sword style that had earned him his reputation in East Blue proved even more devastating against the unprepared agents of Baroque works. One sword style, Zoro declared, sheathing two blades and holding only Wado Ichimonji. Lion's Song. The attack cut through multiple opponents, their weapons falling useless to the ground. The so-called Mr. 8 and his companions never stood a chance against Zoro's ferocity. By dawn, dozens of unconscious bodies littered the streets of Whiskey Peak. Zoro, barely winded, surveyed his work with grim satisfaction. The Grand Line's dangers had been oversold, or perhaps he had simply grown stronger than he realized. As he prepared to leave the fraudulent town, having commandeered a small boat and supplies, a new wanted poster fluttered from the pocket of one of the fallen agents. Zoro picked it up, curious. The face that stared back at him was familiar. The boy with the straw hat, Monkey D. Luffy. His bounty had increased significantly since Zoro had last heard of him. Interesting, folding the poster. Thoughtfully, Zoro tucked it into his haramaki. There was something about that boy, something significant that Zoro couldn't quite place. Perhaps their paths would cross again someday. For now, though, his course was set. The log pose had locked onto the next island, and with it, the next step. Toward finding Mihawk and fulfilling his promise to Kina. Little did Zoro know that his actions at Whiskey Peak had drawn the attention of Baroque Works' higher echelons, or that the next island, Little Garden, held dangers far beyond anything he had faced thus far. The Grand Line had only begun to test the solitary swordsman. Little Garden proved to be aptly named in its irony. The island was anything but little, and its garden consisted of prehistoric plants and dinosaurs that had long gone extinct elsewhere in the world. Zoro found himself in a literal lost world, where survival meant constant vigilance. This island is trapped in the past, Zoro muttered as he sliced through the vines blocking his path. A massive long-necked dinosaur calling out in the distance. He had spent 3 days exploring the island, waiting for the log pose to reset and point to the next destination. In that time, he had encountered beasts that defied imagination and had narrowly avoided becoming a meal more than once. But the true danger of Little Garden revealed itself on the 4th day, when Zoro stumbled upon a clearing where two massive humanoid figures were locked in fierce combat that shook the very ground. They were giants, easily 10 times Zoro's height, wielding weapons larger than ships. One bore a shield and sword, the other an axe that could fell the island's largest trees with a single swing. Zoro observed their battle from the cover of the jungle, impressed by their skill despite their size. These were warriors in the truest sense, battling with honor and strength that commanded respect. When their duel ended in yet another draw, as apparently it had for over 100 years, Zoro stepped from his hiding place and approached. Oh ho, a human visitor! The shield-bearing giant boomed, noticing Zoro. I am Dory, and this is my eternal rival, Brogy. A swordsman, Brogy noted with interest. A tiny one, but I can see the warrior spirit in you. Their jovial welcome surprised Zoro, who had expected hostility. Instead, he found himself invited to share their meal, a roasted dinosaur larger than any feast he had seen before. 100 years we have been dueling, Dory explained between massive bites. Our homeland of Elbaf sends its greatest warriors to fight across the world, carrying our pride with us. A battle to determine the strongest, Zoro said, understanding filling him. I can respect that. The giants laughed heartily. Indeed, you understand the warrior's way. It was during this unexpected fellowship that disaster struck. A hidden bomb, planted in the alcohol Dory consumed, exploded within the giant's stomach, leaving him grievously wounded and believing Brogy had violated their code of honor. Treachery! Dory bellowed in pain and rage, forcing himself to stand despite his injuries. After a century of honorable combat, I did nothing, Brogy protested, confusion and horror on his massive face. Zoro, sensing foul play, scanned the jungle's edge and caught a glimpse of movement, someone watching, someone who had orchestrated this intervention. Stop! Zoro called to the giants. This was sabotage. There's someone else on this island. But Dory, blinded by pain and perceived betrayal, couldn't be reasoned with. He charged at Brogy, who had no choice but to defend himself against his injured friend. Zoro pursued the mysterious saboteur through the dense jungle, his instincts leading him toward a presence that radiated dangerous intent. He caught occasional glimpses of a strange figure in an extravagant costume, moving with surprising agility. Show yourself, Zoro demanded, cutting through a tangle of vines. My. What a troublesome little swordsman, a smooth voice replied. The figure that emerged onto the path before Zoro was bizarre in appearance, dressed in flamboyant clothes with his hair styled in an elaborate manner, but it was the coldness in his eyes that put Zoro immediately on guard. Mr. 3 of Baroque Works. The man introduced himself with a theatrical bow. I must thank you for the chaos you caused at Whiskey Peak. It provided such an opportunity for advancement. Zoro drew his swords. You poisoned the giant. A necessary stratagem, Mr. 3 replied dismissively. Those fools have bounties on their heads that have gone uncollected for a century. But that ends today, as does your journey, Roronoa Zoro. With that declaration, Mr. 3's hands transformed into flowing wax, revealing his devil fruit ability. The wax shot towards Zoro, who barely dodged the attack. Candle Champion! Mr. 3 declared, his body becoming encased in a protective wax armor that made him resemble a boxer. What followed was one of the strangest battles of Zoro's career. The Waxman's devil fruit powers proved surprisingly versatile and dangerous, capable of creating weapons, traps, and protective barriers at will. Your swords cannot cut my special wax once it hardens, Mr. 3 taunted as Zoro's blades bounced off his armor. It's as hard as steel. Zoro, breathing heavily, reassessed his opponent. If steel like wax couldn't be cut, he would need to prevent it from hardening or find another approach entirely. Is that so? Zoro replied, sheathing 2 of his swords and holding only Wado Ichimonji. Let's test that theory. Closing his eyes, Zoro focused his mind, recalling his battle with Mihawk and the lesson that had nearly cost him his life. There was something there, something about cutting that went beyond mere physical force. The ability to cut nothing, and by extension, to cut anything. When his eyes opened, they held a new clarity. With a movement almost too fast to follow, Zoro struck. One sword style. Lion's Song. The blade passed through Mr. 3's wax armor as if it were paper, leaving the Baroque Works agent staring in disbelief at the clean cut that had split his supposedly impenetrable defense. Impossible, Mr. 3 gasped, stumbling backward. How did you cut my wax? Zoro didn't answer, pressing his advantage as Mr. 3 desperately created more wax constructs to defend himself. But the paradigm had shifted. Zoro could now cut through the wax regardless of its hardness, his blade finding the agent himself despite his frantic defenses. With a final decisive strike, Zoro defeated Mr. 3, leaving the agent unconscious amid the ruins of his wax creations. Returning to the giants, Zoro found them both wounded but alive. The truth of the sabotage now clear to them. Their gratitude was immense. You have saved our honor, small warrior, Brogy declared. For that, we are in your debt. Dory, recovering from his injuries, nodded in agreement. Ask what you will of us, and if it is within our power, it be granted. Zoro considered the offer carefully. I seek Hawkeye's Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Do you know of him? The giants exchanged knowing looks. The one with the hawk eyes and black blade. Dory confirmed. He is known even among the giants, a warrior worthy of respect. He serves the world government now, Brogy added, as one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Finding him will mean navigating the treacherous politics of this world, not just its seas. The 7 warlords of the sea, pirates who worked for the world government, given special privileges in exchange for their allegiance. Zoro had heard rumors, but now the reality of Mihawk's position became clear. His path forward would be even more complicated than he had imagined. The castle of Kuraigana Island rose from the mist like a specter, its dark spires piercing the perpetually overcast sky. After months of island hopping across the Grand Line, battling pirates, dodging marines, and even surviving a brief disastrous visit to the desert kingdom of Alabasta during a civil war, Zoro had finally found his destination. The home of Dracula. Mihawk Zoro stood at the edge of the forest surrounding the castle, his clothing weathered from his journey, his body bearing new scars alongside the massive one Mihawk had given him at their first meeting. But it was his eyes that had changed. The most harder, sharper, focused by unwavering purpose. Finally, he murmured, adjusting the white sword at his hip. In his journey, he had replaced his 2 lesser blades with stronger ones won in battle. Now, Wado Ichimonji was accompanied by Kitetsu III, a cursed blade that had almost taken his arm when he tested its luck against his own, and Yubashiri, a fine sword gifted to him by a shopkeeper in Logetown who had recognized his skill. The trek through the forest was unnerving. Humanoid figures with the faces of baboons attacked at random intervals, wielding weapons with surprising skill. Zoro cut them down methodically, recognizing the challenge for what it was, a test to weed out unworthy visitors. As he approached the castle gates, the largest of the creatures appeared, wielding a sword that mimicked Mihawk's own black blade. This one fought with precision and power that nearly matched Zoro's own. Interesting, a familiar voice commented from behind Zoro as he finished dispatching the creature. You've improved. Zoro turned slowly to face Hawkeye's Mihawk, who stood observing with his characteristic aloof expression. The world's greatest swordsman hadn't changed at all since their encounter at the Burati. I told you I would find you, Zoro said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Mihawk's piercing eyes assessed Zoro with clinical detachment. So you did. And now that you have found me, what do you intend to do? Challenge me again. The outcome will be the same. I don't believe that, Zoro replied, his hand moving to his swords. I've grown stronger. Indeed you have, Mihawk acknowledged. But the gap between us remains vast. You are not ready. The dismissal stung Zoro's pride, but he contained his reaction. Rashness had cost him dearly in their first encounter. Then make me ready, Zoro said, the words almost physically painful to utter. Train me. Surprise flickered briefly across Mihawk's normally impassive face. You would ask your ultimate rival to train you? Unusual. I don't care about unusual, Zoro replied. I care about becoming the strongest. If learning from you is the path to defeating you, so be it. Mihawk studied him for a long moment, then turned toward the castle. Come, we will discuss this over wine. If nothing else, your determination deserves that much. The interior of the castle was as austere as its master, with sparse furnishings and few concessions to comfort. Mihawk led Zoro to a dining hall dominated by a massive table, where he poured 2 glasses of blood-red wine. You have been busy since our last meeting, Mihawk observed, taking a seat. Your name has appeared in several reports from the world government. Zoro remained standing, uncomfortable with the civility. I haven't been trying to make a name for myself, and yet you have. The pirate hunter turned pirate who cut down a Baroque works officer agent, disrupted a civil war in Alabasta, and has acquired a bounty that now stands at 60 million berries. The amount surprised Zoro. He hadn't realized his notoriety had grown so significantly. I'm not a pirate, he corrected. I have no crew, no flag. I'm just a swordsman with a goal. Mihawk sipped his wine thoughtfully. Labels matter less than actions. But your point is taken. He set down his glass. Now, explain why I should invest my time in training a man who aims to take my title. Zoro met Mihawk's gaze directly. Because you're bored. The blunt assessment hung in the air between them. When we fought at the Baratia, area, Zoro continued, "You used a dinner knife against me. That's how beneath your notice I was. But you let me live because you saw potential. Because you sensed that someday I might actually challenge you genuinely." Mihawk's expression remained neutral, but he didn't. Interrupt. "I think you're lonely at the top," Zoro pressed on. "I think you've been the greatest for so long that you've forgotten the thrill of a true fight, of being pushed to your limits. Train me, and I promise you this, the duel we eventually have will be one worthy of your title." For several tense moments, Mihawk sat in silence, his hawk-like eyes boring into Zoro's. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a short, sharp sound that echoed in the cavernous hall. "Perceptive," Mihawk acknowledged, rising from his seat. "Very well, Roronoa Zoro. I will train you, not as a favor, but as an investment in my own future entertainment." He walked to a window overlooking the misty forests of Kurigana. "But understand this, my training will be merciless. I will break you down to your foundations and rebuild you. Many days you will wish I had killed you at the Barati." "I can handle it," Zoro stated, his resolve unwavering. Mihawk turned back, his gaze severe. "We shall see. There is one condition. You will not challenge me until I deem you ready. Not one day sooner. Do you accept these terms?" It was a difficult concession. Zoro's instinct was to fight, to test himself constantly against the strongest. Patience had never been his virtue, but he recognized the opportunity before him, a chance to learn from the very best, to close the gap between them in the most efficient way possible. "I accept," Zoro said finally. "Then your training begins tomorrow at dawn," Mihawk declared. "I suggest you rest while you can. It will be your last comfortable night for many months." As Zoro followed a humanoid baboon servant to his assigned quarters, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: anticipation for the growth to come, determination to endure whatever trials Mihawk devised, and deep beneath it all, a flicker of doubt. Had he made the right choice? Would training under Mihawk truly lead him to surpassing the master? Or was he compromising his independence, the very quality that had defined his journey thus far? He decided as he lay down on the sparse bed. This was not compromise, but adaptation. The path to becoming the greatest swordsman was never going to be straightforward. If learning from Mihawk was a necessary detour, then so be it. As sleep claimed him, Zoro's last thought was of Quina. "Watch me," he whispered to her memory. "I'm one step closer to our dream." Little did Zoro know that elsewhere in the grand line, the world was being reshaped by events he would have been part of in another timeline. The Straw Hat Pirates, without their first mate, were forging a different path through the seas, their adventures altered in subtle but significant ways by his absence. 2 years passed under Mihawk's tutelage, 2 years of relentless training that pushed Zoro beyond all previous limits. 2 years of broken bones, torn muscles, and countless defeats at the hands of his mentor, but also 2 years of unprecedented growth. The world had changed dramatically during that time. News reached Kurigana Island of events that shook the foundations of the global order: the war at Marineford that resulted in Whitebeard's death and Fire Fist Ace's execution, the emergence of the worst generation of pirates, and most recently, the return of the Straw Hat Pirates after a 2-year absence. That last piece of news had caught Zoro's attention particularly. The name Monkey D. Luffy kept appearing in reports, the rubber man's exploits growing more impressive with each telling. Something about that straw-hatted pirate nagged at Zoro's mind, like a dream half remembered upon waking. On the final day of his training, Zoro stood before Mihawk in the castle courtyard, both men soaked from the rain that perpetually fell on Kurigana. "You have reached the limit of what I can teach you," Mihawk stated, his hawk eyes assessing his student with their characteristic intensity. "The rest of your growth must come through experience and your own determination." Zoro nodded, his hand resting on Wado Ichimonji. During his training, he had mastered techniques that once seemed impossible. He had learned to coat his blades with haki, to hear the breath of all things, and to cut substances previously impervious to his swords. Most importantly, he had begun to develop his own unique techniques, moving beyond mere mimicry of established forms. "I thank you for your instruction," Zoro said formally, bowing to his mentor. "Are you prepared to challenge me now?" Mihawk asked. His hand moving to the hilt of his black blade, Zoro straightened, meeting Mihawk's gaze steadily. "No." Surprise flickered across Mihawk's face. Explain? 2 years ago, I would have said yes without hesitation, Zoro replied. But now I understand the true depth of what it means to be the greatest. I'm stronger, yes, but not yet at my peak. When I challenge you, I want it to be a duel that goes down in history, not merely a test of my current abilities. A rare smile curved Mihawk's lips. Perhaps my greatest success as a teacher was imparting patience to the most impatient student. Zoro smirked in response. Don't get used to it. My patience has its limits. Where will you go? Mihawk asked as Zoro gathered his modest possessions. Sabaody Archipelago, Zoro answered. It's time I re-entered the world properly. Mihawk nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. Sabaody was a gateway to the new world, where the strongest pirates gathered. It was also rumored to be where the Straw Hat Pirates had recently been sighted. As Zoro departed Kurigana Island in a small boat provided by Mihawk, he felt a sense of completion. One chapter of his journey was ending, another beginning. The world awaited, and with it, the path to fulfilling his promise to Quina. Sabaody Archipelago was as chaotic as the report suggested. The massive mangrove trees with their bubble-producing bark created an environment unlike any Zoro had seen before. Pirates, bounty hunters, marines, and civilians all mingled in this lawless zone, the air thick with tension and opportunity. Zoro moved through the crowds with practiced vigilance, 3 swords at his hip, drawing curious and wary glances. His time with Mihawk had changed him physically as well as mentally. He was harder, more defined, with a new scar over his left eye gained during a particularly brutal training session. His green hair had grown longer, and his presence had developed a gravity that caused even hardened pirates to step aside as he passed. At a tavern in Grove 13, Zoro ordered sake and listened to the conversations around him, gathering information. The name Straw Hat Luffy came up repeatedly, along with mentions of Fishman Island and something called the Punk Hazard Incident. They say he's formed an alliance with Trafalgar Law, a pirate whispered to his companion, the Surgeon of Death, and Straw Hat, together 2 of the worst generation joining forces. Bad news for anyone in their way, his friend replied, especially with monsters like pirate hunter Zoro on their crew. Zoro nearly spat out his drink. What did you say? The pirates looked up, startled by his sudden interest. About Straw Hat and Law? No? About Zoro being on their crew. The pirates exchanged confused glances. Roronoa Zoro, the 3-sword-style user. He's Straw Hat's first mate. Has been since East Blue. Where have you been? Under a rock. Zoro's mind raced. Someone was using his name, his fighting style. An imposter sailing with the Straw Hats. The very idea was an insult to everything he stood for. Before he could pursue this line of questioning further, an explosion rocked the archipelago. Patrons rushed to the windows as smoke rose from a distant grove. Marines and Straw Hats clashing again, someone shouted. Without hesitation, Zoro threw money on the table and headed toward the commotion. If someone was falsely using his name, he would confront them directly. The scene he found at Grove 46 was one of pure chaos. Marines exchanged fire with a diverse group of pirates, while civilians fled in terror. At the center of the battle stood a young man in a straw hat, his rubber limbs stretching to impossible lengths as he fought off multiple attackers. Monkey D. Luffy. There was no mistaking him from the wanted posters. Nearby fought his crew a long-nosed sniper, a blonde cook in a black suit, a small reindeer shifting between forms, a raven-haired woman creating limbs from nowhere, a cyborg with massive mechanical arms, and a skeleton wielding a sword, but no green-haired swordsman, no 3-sword-style user. Confusion gave way to understanding. There was no imposter. The pirates at the tavern had been mistaken, or perhaps referring to rumors rather than facts. The Straw Hat crew had no Roronoa Zoro among them. As Zoro processed this revelation, his eyes met Luffy's across the battlefield. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Recognition flickered in the rubber man's eyes, though they had never formally met. Something passed between them, an inexplicable sense of connection, of potential, of a bond that might have been. Then the moment broke as a Marine captain attacked Luffy, drawing his attention away. But it was enough. Zoro knew with sudden certainty that his path and Luffy's were meant to cross more significantly than these brief encounters. Drawing all 3 swords, Zoro stepped into the fray. Not to join the Straw Hats, not yet, but to test them, to measure this crew that had made such waves without him. Santoryu, he called out, placing Wado Ichimonji between his teeth. Onigiri, Marines fell before his onslaught as he cut a path toward Luffy. Today would be the day these ships passing in the night finally acknowledged each other properly. Today, legends would collide. "Who are you?" Luffy asked, his fist still smoking from the Gear Second attack that had dispatched the Marine captain. Around them, the battle continued, but a small pocket of calm had formed where they stood. "Roronoa Zoro," he answered, removing Wado Ichimonji from his mouth, but keeping his other swords drawn. "And your Monkey D. Luffy," recognition dawned on Luffy's face. "The Pirate Hunter! I remember you from the Barity when you fought Hawkeyes." So Luffy did remember their brief encounter years ago. "Interesting. Why are you helping us?" the Rubber Man asked, his characteristically direct approach cutting to the heart of the matter. Before Zoro could answer, more Marines closed in. Back to back, they fought off the attackers, their movements somehow synchronizing despite never having fought together before. It felt natural, instinctive, as if they had done this countless times. When the immediate threat had been neutralized, Luffy grinned at him. "You're strong! Join my crew!" The bluntness of the invitation took Zoro by surprise. "Just like that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Luffy replied with unshakable confidence. "You're a good person with a dream, that's all I need to know." Something about Luffy's simplistic worldview struck a chord with Zoro. In all his travels, all his battles, he had never met someone who approached life with such straightforward clarity. Before he could respond, the blonde cook appeared at Luffy's side. "We need to go, Captain. Admiral Kizaru has been spotted heading this way." An admiral. Even with his training under Mihawk, Zoro wasn't ready to face one of the Marines' ultimate weapons. "Not yet. Come with us," Luffy insisted, stretching an arm toward Zoro. "We're heading to the New World." Time slowed as Zoro considered the invitation. The New World was indeed his destination, the place where he would ultimately find Mihawk again and fulfill his promise to Kuina. But did he need a crew to get there? Had his solitary path made him stronger, or merely more isolated? In that moment of decision, Zoro saw two potential futures stretching before him. In one, he continued alone, self-reliant and unburdened by the needs or goals of others. In the other, he joined this strange crew, becoming part of something larger than himself, with all the complications and benefits that entailed. "I have my own path," Zoro finally answered, sheathing his swords. "But it seems our destinations align. I'll accompany you to the New World, Straw Hat. After that, we'll see." It wasn't a commitment to join the crew, but it wasn't a rejection either. Luffy seemed to understand the nuance, his grin widening. "Good enough for now. Let's go." As they ran toward the Thousand Sunny, the Straw Hat's remarkable ship, Zoro felt a strange sense of deja vu. As if he had always been meant to board this vessel. The escape from Sabaody was chaotic but successful, the Sunny's coding allowing them to submerge and avoid the pursuing Marines. Underwater, headed for Fishman Island, Zoro found himself formally introduced to the crew he had only glimpsed during battle. "This is Zoro," Luffy announced enthusiastically. "He's super strong and uses 3 swords." The crew's reactions varied from Nami's skeptical recognition, the bounty hunter from East Blue, to Sanji's immediate antagonism. "Another musclehead? Great." Under Robin's quiet assessment, "The man who trained under Mihawk." Each interaction felt strangely familiar, as if they were reuniting rather than meeting for the first time. In the days that followed, as they traversed the ocean depths and eventually reached Fishman Island, Zoro observed the crew dynamics with growing interest. They functioned as a family more than a traditional pirate crew, each member with their own distinct role and personality, yet unified by absolute loyalty to their captain. Luffy, for his part, was both exactly what Zoro expected and nothing like he imagined. His strength was undeniable, his battle instincts remarkable. Yet he approached leadership with a childlike simplicity that should have been disastrous, but somehow worked perfectly for this particular group. After Fishman Island, as they finally entered the New World, Zoro found himself at a crossroads. His initial agreement to accompany the Straw Hats had reached its conclusion. It was time to decide. On the deck of the Sunny, under a sky filled with stars, Zoro found Luffy sitting on the figurehead, his favorite spot according to the others. "We're in the New World now," Zoro stated, leaning against the railing beside the figurehead. "Yep," Luffy replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's amazing, isn't it? I held up my end of the deal," Zoro continued. "I accompanied you here." Luffy turned to look at him, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Are you leaving?" The direct question demanded an equally direct answer. "I don't know." Silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward. What's your dream? Zoro? Luffy finally asked. To become the greatest swordsman in the world, Zoro answered without hesitation. Luffy nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. I'm going to be the Pirate King. I know. Do you think our dreams clash? Zoro considered the question. No, they can exist side by side. Then stay, Luffy said simply. Be my first mate. First mate. The position felt right somehow, as if it had been waiting for him all along. I have to face Mihawk eventually, Zoro warned. That's non-negotiable. Of course. Luffy agreed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to support a crew member challenging one of the most dangerous men in the world. That's your dream. In that moment, Zoro made his decision. Perhaps his solitary path had been necessary, forging him into the swordsman he had become. But perhaps, too, the next stage of his journey required something different: companionship, purpose beyond his own ambition, and a captain worth following. All right, Zoro said, extending his hand. I'll be your first mate, Luffy. As they clasped hands, sealing the agreement, Zoro felt as if a missing piece had finally clicked into place. In another world, another timeline, perhaps they had met earlier, their paths intertwined from the beginning. But in this world, they had found each other when they were ready, when they had each become who they needed to be. The next morning, as the Sunny sailed deeper into the new world, Zoro stood at the railing and looked out at the endless ocean. His hand rested on Wado Ichimonji, Kuina's sword, the physical embodiment of his promise. I'm still on the path, he whispered to her memory. It just took an unexpected turn. Somewhere far ahead, Mihawk waited. The ultimate duel still loomed in Zoro's future, but now he wouldn't face it alone. He had found his crew, his captain, his place in the world. In the end, the question wasn't, what if Zoro never met Luffy, but rather, what happens when they finally do? And the answer, it seemed, was that destinies find a way to align, even when the journey takes a different route. Some bonds, it appeared, were simply meant to be.